My name is Alex. My life has been a series of crooked paths and steep climbs, and at the heart of it all lies one person, my sibling, Evelyn. Evelyn, the one I once looked up to with admiration and trust, who took all of that love, crumpled it in her hands, and left me in the dust. The day she betrayed me, something in me shattered, but over time, those broken pieces hardened into something far sharper, an unshakable determination to succeed and make her regret every single thing she had done. We grew up in a small suburban house, the kind where every yard was well kept, and every family seemed to have their secrets hidden behind neatly trimmed hedges. Our parents, loving but strict, always told us that family was the most important thing in the world. Evelyn and I were like two sides of the same coin. She was older by 4 years, brilliant, and had a presence that could light up a room. I always admired her, maybe even envied her a little, for how effortlessly she managed everything, from her schoolwork to her friends. I was the quieter one, content to live in her shadow, to let her take the spotlight, while I cheered her on from the sidelines. But as the years passed, I started noticing things that didn't sit right with me. Evelyn had a way of manipulating people, subtle, clever manipulations that often made her come out on top. I thought it was just her charm, but the day she turned her scheming against me was the day I realized how wrong I had been. It all began with a project. I had been working on a tech startup idea for almost a year. It was my baby, an app designed to help small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. I poured everything I had into it, sleepless nights, missed parties, and countless iterations of code. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I made the mistake of sharing my progress with Evelyn. She'd always been good with business, and I thought she could help me make the right connections to bring it to life. "You know, Alex," she said one night, her eyes sparkling as she looked over my prototype, "this could really be something big. You've done an amazing job." For a brief moment, I felt pride swell in my chest. She believed in me. She wanted to help me. But that pride quickly turned into devastation when a month later, I saw Evelyn on the cover of a local business magazine, smiling brightly with the headline, "Revolutionary App Changes the Game for Small Businesses." It was my app, my idea. And she hadn't even bothered to tell me. The shock left me speechless. I remember staring at the magazine, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped my heart out. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She looked at me with that same charming smile, the one that had always made people fall in love with her, and said, "Alex, you're too naive. You wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway." I could barely comprehend her words. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. She didn't just take my idea. She took my dream, my hard work, my chance to prove myself. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I would make her regret underestimating me. I spent the next few months in a daze, unsure of what to do, of how to pick up the pieces. I watched as Evelyn's success grew, her face appearing on more magazines, her name becoming synonymous with innovation. She had everything I had worked for, and the worst part was, everyone thought she deserved it. But I knew better. And eventually, that daze turned into focus. If Evelyn thought I was too naive to make something of myself, I would prove her wrong. I would build something even bigger, something she couldn't steal or undermine. I started from scratch, working late nights in a cramped apartment I could barely afford, taking freelance coding jobs during the day to pay the bills. I refused to let the bitterness consume me. Instead, I used it as fuel. I learned everything I could about business, about marketing, about how to protect my work from people like Evelyn. I built connections, real connections, people who believed in me, who saw my potential beyond just being Evelyn's younger brother. It took years. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But every time I felt that way, I would think of Evelyn's smile that day, of the way she dismissed me as if I were nothing, and I would keep going. Eventually, my hard work paid off. I launched my new startup, a platform that went beyond just inventory management. It was a complete ecosystem for small businesses, offering tools for accounting, customer relations, and analytics. It was everything my original app could have been and more, and this time, I made sure it had my name on it. The launch was a success beyond anything I could have imagined. Investors came knocking, partnerships were formed, and before long, my platform was making waves in the industry. I was no longer just Evelyn's younger brother. I was Alex, the founder of one of the fastest growing startups in the country. And that's when Evelyn came back into my life. It started with a phone call, an unfamiliar number that I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Alex, her voice came through the line, hesitant, almost unsure. It's Evelyn. I think we should talk. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The person who had betrayed me, who had taken everything from me, was now reaching out. I could hear something in her voice, something I had never heard before. Was it regret? Fear? Desperation? I'm busy, I said, my voice cold, and hung up. But that wasn't the end of it. She showed up at my office a week later, unannounced. I still remember the look on her face when she saw me, a mixture of surprise and something else, something that almost looked like pride. She tried to play it cool, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Alex, she started, her voice softer than I remembered. You've done really well for yourself. I want to apologize. I know I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since. I stared at her, the woman who had once been my hero, who had turned into my greatest enemy. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear her say those words, to have her acknowledge the pain she'd caused. But now, standing there in my office, I realized that I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her validation. I had built something on my own, something she could never take away from me. I appreciate the apology, I said, my voice steady, but I don't think we have anything left to say to each other. She looked taken aback, her eyes widening as if she hadn't expected me to be so blunt. Alex, please, I want to make things right. Maybe we could work together again, like old times? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Work together? After everything she had done? Evelyn, the old times you're talking about ended the day you decided I wasn't worth your honesty, I said, my voice growing colder. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, a ghost of the past I had finally exorcised. In the months that followed, I heard bits and pieces about Evelyn. Her company was struggling, investors were pulling out, and her once bright star was beginning to fade. Part of me felt a sense of satisfaction, a vindication that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But another part of me felt something else, something that almost felt like sadness. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I had wanted her to succeed, just not at my expense. One day, I got another call. This time, it wasn't from Evelyn. It was from an old family friend, someone who had known us both since we were kids. Alex, he said, his voice heavy, Evelyn needs help. She's in a bad place, and she doesn't have anyone else to turn to. I sat there, the phone pressed against my ear, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to hang up, to say that it wasn't my problem anymore. But another part of me, a part that still remembered the good times, the times when Evelyn was the sister I loved, couldn't do it. I agreed to meet her, not because I wanted to forgive her, not because I wanted to forget what she had done, but because I needed closure. I needed to see for myself what had become of the person who had once meant everything to me. When I walked into the small coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, I almost didn't recognize her. The confident, radiant woman who had once seemed untouchable now looked tired, worn down by the weight of her own choices. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, vulnerability. Alex, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, thank you for coming. I sat down across from her, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling, but I'm asking for it anyway. I've lost everything, Alex. I don't have anyone else. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw not the person who had betrayed me, but the sister I had once loved. The person who had held my hand when I was scared, who had cheered me on when I needed it most. And in that moment, I realized that holding on to my anger, my need for revenge, wasn't going to change what had happened. It wasn't going to bring back the time we had lost. Evelyn, I said, my voice softening, I can't forget what you did, but I can try to forgive you. We can't go back to the way things were, but maybe we can start over." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in them. She nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I'd like that." We sat there for hours, talking, not about the past, but about the future, about how we could move forward, not as business partners, not as rivals, but as siblings. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. In the end, my revenge wasn't about destroying Evelyn or making her suffer. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above what she had done, that I could succeed on my own terms. And as I sat there, watching the sun set through the coffee shop window, I realized that my greatest achievement wasn't the company I had built or the success I had found. It was letting go of the anger that had held me back for so long and finding a way to move forward, not just for myself, but for the sister I had once loved, and maybe, just maybe, could learn to love again. After that day in the coffee shop, Evelyn and I decided to give our relationship another shot. It wasn't easy. There were still many wounds that needed healing, and neither of us was the same person we had once been. But we both knew we couldn't keep living in the past. We had to find a way forward, and we had to do it together. The next few months were filled with awkward silences, hesitant conversations, and small attempts at reconnecting. We began with the simplest of things, meeting for coffee every Sunday, just to talk. At first, it felt forced, like we were trying too hard to recreate something that had been lost. But slowly, those meetings started feeling less like an obligation and more like something I genuinely looked forward to. We talked about our lives, our struggles, our dreams, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was getting to know my sister again. Evelyn had changed. The confident, almost arrogant edge she once had was gone, replaced by a quieter, more introspective version of herself. She spoke about the mistakes she had made, the people she had hurt, and the lessons she had learned. She told me about the fallout from her company's failure, how the investors had pulled out, how she had lost everything she had worked for. It was clear that the experience had humbled her, and I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: empathy. I had changed too. The anger that had driven me for so long had been replaced by a sense of purpose. I had built something I was proud of, something that was mine, and I no longer needed validation from anyone, not even Evelyn. I realized that my success wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, that I could rise above the hurt and become the person I wanted to be. One day, during one of our Sunday coffee meetings, Evelyn hesitated before speaking. She looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim, and then looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Alex," she began, I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I want to do something that shows you how sorry I am." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her that she didn't need to do anything, that her apology was enough. But another part of me knew that she needed this, that she needed to find a way to make amends, not just for me, but for herself. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my voice gentle. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "I want to help you with your company. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to use what I've learned to help you grow. I want to be a part of something meaningful, something that we can build together." I was taken aback. The idea of working with Evelyn again was something I had never considered. The thought of letting her into the world I had created, the world that had been my refuge from the pain she had caused, was terrifying. But as I looked at her, I saw the sincerity in her eyes, the vulnerability that she had never shown before, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the next step in our journey. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady but cautious. "I can't promise anything, Evelyn. This is important to me, and I need to be sure that it's the right decision." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "That's all I'm asking for, just a chance." In the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about Evelyn's offer. I spoke to my team, the people who had been with me since the beginning, who had believed in me when no one else did. They were cautious, understandably so, but they trusted my judgment. And in the end, I decided to take a leap of faith. I invited Evelyn to a meeting with my team. It was awkward at first. Everyone knew who she was, and the tension in the room was palpable. But Evelyn handled it with grace. She was honest about her past, about the mistakes she had made, and about her desire to make things right. She didn't try to charm them or win them over with false promises. She was simply herself, raw and unguarded, and slowly the walls began to come down. Working together was a challenge. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, when the past threatened to pull us back into the darkness we had fought so hard to escape. But there were also moments of genuine connection, moments when I saw glimpses of the sister I had once idolized, the sister who had always been there for me, who had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Evelyn and I found ourselves alone, the rest of the team having gone home. We sat in the quiet of the conference room, the city lights twinkling outside the window. Evelyn looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I used to think that success was all about being the best, about winning at any cost. But now I realize that it's not about that at all. It's about the people you have beside you, the people who believe in you and lift you up. I'm grateful that you've given me a chance to be one of those people for you." I smiled, a warmth spreading through my chest. "I'm glad you're here, Evelyn. It's not always easy, but I think we're finally on the right path." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think so, too." In that moment, I knew that we had come full circle. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it was all still there, a part of our story. But it no longer defined us. We were more than the mistakes we had made, more than the hurt we had caused each other. We were siblings, partners, and maybe, just maybe, friends once again. Our journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it together, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as family.
Eva was a young, ambitious girl who had only recently graduated from university. Her plans for the future were filled with inspiration and determination, because she was always striving for new heights, trying to break out of the ordinary. The world around her beckoned her with a variety of possibilities, and every day was a chance for her to discover something new. Fate seemed to favor her. She had a boyfriend named John, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. He seemed like a solid support, someone she could rely on, and Eve believed their connection would stand the test of time. But behind the beautiful picture they both painted for others was an anxiety that Eve felt more and more acutely every day. John was becoming more and more distant. His work was taking up more and more of his time, and the answers to questions about their future together were becoming less and less clear. Each week, she felt more and more that an invisible wall was growing between them, but she was afraid to realize the seriousness of the problem. One evening, deciding to surprise him, Eva went to John's favorite cafe, where they often spent time together. Stepping inside, her eyes immediately snatched him up at a corner table. However, her heart sank when she saw that he wasn't sitting alone. Next to him was another woman. John, who not so long ago had seemed loving and faithful to her, now sat laughing and holding the hand of another. The scene before her eyes instantly shot through her, filling her with a pain she didn't know how to deal with. Eve froze in place, unable to believe her eyes. It all seemed like a nightmare she was about to wake up from. Her legs stopped obeying, and she froze like a statue, watching the person she trusted most in the world betray her in the most brutal way possible. In that moment, the world she had so carefully built with John crumbled. All the dreams of a future together, of a family, of happiness were shattered into tiny shards. She couldn't bear the sight and walked out of the cafe without saying a word. Tears came to her eyes, but she desperately held them back, trying not to draw attention to herself. A storm of emotions raged inside, from anger to endless sadness. Outside, Eve froze for a few moments. Her mind was chaotic, her thoughts jumbled, and she didn't know what to do next. Her feet carried her through the streets of the city on their own until she found herself in front of the nearest bar. She didn't care where she was. The important thing was to get away from the place that had witnessed her personal tragedy. The bar was her only refuge from the pain, and she decided to go inside, hoping that something would help dull her emotions. Once inside, Eve took the farthest table in the corner where she couldn't be seen by outsiders. She hugged her shoulders as if trying to protect herself from this sudden, unbearable pain. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it was about to break completely. Time seemed to slow down. Every second she felt the weight of the betrayal she was facing. Suddenly, to her surprise, a man approached the table. He was dressed in a strict business suit, but his manner was calm and unobtrusive. He introduced himself as Alex.
Excuse me, do you mind if I sit down?
His voice sounded soft but confident, catching her attention. Eve barely looked up to find a complete stranger in front of her. His eyes glowed with calmness, and there was an incomprehensible warmth in his gaze. But she still wasn't ready to talk to him. Too much had happened in the last few hours.
I don't need company,
She said coldly, turning away from him. Her voice sounded harsher than she intended, but she couldn't help it. All she wanted now was to be alone, to figure out how to deal with the storm of emotions.
I understand.
Alex answered, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave.
I just wanted to make sure you were okay.
Ava couldn't answer. She was too tired to object. Alex wasn't intrusive. Something about his presence made her feel safe, though she didn't realize it. He sat down across from her, still looking at her intently, but not asking any questions.
It's okay.
She finally said, but her voice trembled. Tears came to her throat again, and she tried to hold them back so that she wouldn't cry in front of the stranger. Alex realized that it was better for her not to be alone in this state. Seeing her confusion, he offered to walk her home. At first, she refused, but after a while, exhausted by doubts and emotions, Eva agreed. They walked in silence, and Alex didn't try to start a conversation, realizing that she needed time to come to her senses. When they finally approached her house, their meeting suddenly moved to a new level. The moment when John appeared in front of them, John, upon seeing Eve, changed in an instant. His face contorted with rage, and his eyes shone with hatred. He didn't notice Alex, and without waiting for an explanation, he rushed to Eve with accusations.
What are you doing to him?
He shouted, his voice sounding like he was ready to tear her apart. In an instant, his hand came up and he struck her across the face. The blow was sharp and sudden, like lightning piercing the sky. Eva recoiled in horror, falling to the cold asphalt. She held her cheek, where a deep scratch appeared. Alex, who witnessed this horror, was in shock. He could not believe that someone was capable of treating a woman so cruelly. Quickly coming to his senses, he stood between Ava and John, his body becoming a barrier, and his face expressing determination and defense. "Go away before it's too late," he said. His voice was quiet, but he could hear the threat in it. John, intending to reply something, felt a stirring rise in his chest. He was unprepared for such a challenge. Seeing Alex's determined look, he stepped back, casting a baleful glance in Eve's direction before disappearing into the darkness. Eva sat on the ground, shocked at what was happening, not realizing how things could have changed so quickly. Alex crouched down next to her, trying to show support. "Let me help you." His voice became soft and full of care, as if he was trying to cover her from pain. Eva wanted to refuse again, but at this moment she wanted so much to have someone by her side, to have someone to show her attention and care in this horrible world. "Okay," she whispered, her voice sounding almost inaudible, but in its intonation she could hear fatigue and fear. Alex picked her up and offered to take her to his house to have her wound treated. Although she was unsure and hesitant, Ava agreed, realizing it was the only way to get away from this place, full of memories of betrayal. When they arrived at Alexi's place, he pulled out a first aid kit and carefully began to treat her cheek, being careful not to cause unnecessary pain. Each of his movements was careful, as if he was afraid of causing her more suffering. As they talked, Eve told him about John's betrayal, about how their relationship had fallen apart in an instant. Alex listened to her with attention, without interrupting. Every word she said echoed in his heart, and with every breath she took, he realized how strong she was, despite all the pain she was going through. "You know, I thought I'd found someone I could spend my life with," she said, bitterness in her voice. "I always dreamed of having a family and that we'd be okay. But now..." "You are stronger than you think," Alex interrupted her. His voice sounded confident. All trials make us stronger. At that moment, the door of the apartment opened and Christina came in, a girl who knew Alex from his studies. She was the daughter of a wealthy businessman and had always tried to get involved with Alex for his position. When she saw them together, she made a jealous scene, not letting Eva say a word. "What are you doing here? Alex!" she shouted, her voice sounding like a thunderclap. Eva, dumbfounded by what was happening, simply stood up and walked out without waiting for an explanation. She couldn't get over this scene, which only increased her feelings of loneliness and betrayal. Alex tried to stop her, but Christina blocked his path. Their eyes met, and he saw the uncertainty in her. That night, he asked his assistant to look into the girl, who turned out to be Eva, and find out what really happened to her. The next morning, Alex found out that her name was Eva, and that she had recently graduated from university. She worked in a small cafe near his office, but she hadn't been there lately. He felt the need to help her, because after seeing her suffering, he couldn't just leave everything to chance. For several days in a row, he stopped by the cafe, hoping to meet her. His thoughts were occupied only with Eva. Finally, on the fourth day, she showed up. But, as it turned out, not to work, she had an argument with her boss. She missed several shifts and was fired right on the spot. Alex, seeing this unpleasant moment, came up to her, determined to support her in a difficult moment. "Eva, wait. Listen to me," he said softly, trying to gain her trust. She hesitated, but finally agreed to talk. They went outside, and Alex explained the whole situation with Christina, saying that she was not his girlfriend at all, but just an old acquaintance. Eva gradually softened, though she was still wary. "I realize that this is not the best time, but I have a proposal," Alex said, noticing her hesitation. "I would like to offer you a job in my company." "But why?" she asked in surprise, feeling distrustful. "Because I think you are a talented and smart girl, and I don't like the way you have been treated," Alex answered. His voice was sincere. "It's not an obligation. It's just an opportunity." Eva hesitated for a long time, but finally agreed. She realized that she had nothing to lose, and this offer seemed like a chance to change her life. As she started working in Alex's company, she gradually got to know him from a different side. Alex turned out to be not only a successful businessman, but also a kind, attentive man. He did not try to impose himself, but his care and attentiveness could not leave Eve indifferent. Over time, her heart began to open to him. Several months passed, during which Eva got used to her new job. Alex gave her a position as an assistant, and they often spent time together discussing projects. Every day, she realized more and more how versatile and generous Alex was. Alex, and his care and attention to detail, only made her trust stronger. Though she still tried to keep her distance, her heart began to melt under his sincere actions. One Friday night, after a long day at work, Alex offered Eva a ride home. They sat in the car, and Eva, feeling comfortable and safe, opened up for the first time in a long time. She told him about her childhood, about how she had always dreamed of becoming a designer, but because of financial problems, she was forced to take a job as a waitress after graduation. Alex listened to her attentively, not interrupting her. He saw in front of him not just a beautiful girl, but a person with dreams and desires which she hid because of past disappointments. His heart grew stronger and stronger as he wanted to be there for her and help her. Soon their conversations became more personal, and Alex felt that their bond was getting stronger. One day, he invited Eva to dinner, and although she hesitated, she finally agreed. That night, over a delicious dinner and candlelight, they talked about everything in the world, as if forgetting all their past anxieties. After dinner, Alex drove Eva home, but when she was about to get out of the car, he asked her quietly, "Eva, can I see you again? Not as a colleague, but as a woman I care about?" Eva looked at him, feeling her heart suddenly beat faster. She hadn't expected such words, but she realized that she cared about Alex too. She smiled shyly. "Yes, I think so."
Hi, I don't know if you'll believe this story. Ever since I was a kid, I felt that my parents hated me. I was the youngest son, the one who was always looked at with disdain. I never understood why. Maybe it was my quiet demeanor that irritated them, or maybe it was because I wasn't inclined to seek their approval like my older brother Richard. Richard, who could do no wrong in their eyes, was constantly praised for every mediocre achievement. Meanwhile, I was told, often in whispers dripping with disdain, that I was a disappointment. My mother, Ruth, once spat at me in a moment of cruel honesty. "You were the mistake," she said coldly. I remember the way her eyes turned hard as she added, "You were the accident we should have avoided." But I wasn't one to wallow in self-pity. I left home at 18, escaping the harsh judgments and constant berating. I worked jobs that barely paid the rent, I saved, and I educated myself, pushing through late-night study sessions and early morning shifts. I learned how to fix things, build things, and sell things, skills that earned me a steady position in a construction company. I made connections, networked, and eventually earned enough to move into my own place, a spacious apartment, one of the high-rises on the better side of the city. The day I moved in, I felt a warmth fill my chest, a quiet satisfaction that told me I had done it, all on my own. No one else's help, no handouts. This was mine. But like a storm cloud darkening the horizon, trouble had a way of finding me. It started with a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother and father, Ruth and Gerald, standing there with looks that could freeze fire. "Well, I see you've moved up in the world," Ruth said. Her voice dripped with condescension. Her eyes swept across the apartment, her lips pulling back into a sneer. Not bad for the son who couldn't do anything right. Gerald, my father, stood next to her with his arms crossed. He said nothing, but his gaze spoke volumes. Disappointment, distrust, and something else, something almost greedy. Ruth elbowed Gerald slightly, and he finally opened his mouth. "We need to talk," he said, the gruffness of his voice masking the intent behind his words. My stomach twisted. I let them in, already knowing that whatever they were about to say would be far from good. They sat on my couch, my mother's eyes scanning the decorations, the furniture, like she was mentally tallying up what each piece must have cost. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, waiting for the inevitable. "It's about your brother," Ruth began. Her tone was clipped, businesslike. "Of course it is," I muttered. I had heard that line many times before. It was always about Richard. "He's having a rough time," she said, her eyes narrowing. "The place he was renting fell through, and it's just not fair that he has to struggle when you have this." She gestured to the apartment, her face twisting with disdain. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, my voice already resigned. Gerald spoke up, his words blunt, the way a hammer is blunt when smashing glass. "We want you to give Richard this apartment. He deserves it more than you do." For a second, the room was completely silent. I blinked, stunned, almost unable to believe the audacity of what I had just heard. "You're joking," I said slowly, though I knew they weren't. My parents had never been ones for jokes, at least not when it came to me. Ruth's expression hardened. "Don't be selfish, Adam. Richard's been struggling and you have this luxury." Her eyes flicked over the kitchen appliances, the hardwood floor, as if each one was a personal affront. I shook my head, feeling something dark unfurling in my chest. Something that had been buried for a long time, forced down by years of mistreatment and neglect. "This is mine," I said, my voice firmer than I had ever used with them before. "I worked for this. I earned this. Richard can find his own way, just like I did." Gerald's face flushed red, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you, you're going to turn your back on your family?" I laughed, the sound bitter. "Everything you've done for me? You mean the years of telling me I'd never amount to anything? Of treating me like garbage while you pampered Richard? You've never done anything for me." Ruth's lips thinned into a harsh line. "You're just proving why you don't deserve this. You're selfish, Adam. Richard is the one who deserves a good life, not you." I felt something snap inside me. Years of bitterness, of hurt, rose to the surface, and I let it. I wasn't that meek, fearful child anymore, desperate for even a scrap of their approval. "Get out," I said, my voice cold. Ruth's eyes widened, fury blazing in her gaze. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, get out. I repeated, pointing to the door. I'm done. You don't get to waltz in here and demand I give up what I've worked for. Not anymore. Gerald stood up, his face twisted in rage. You're going to regret this, boy. I just shook my head. No, I think the only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner. Now get out of my home. Ruth and Gerald exchanged a look, both of them seething, but they stood and moved towards the door. Ruth paused, turning back to me, her eyes cold and full of hatred. You're nothing, Adam, she spat. You'll always be nothing. I met her gaze, my expression calm. We'll see about that. They left, slamming the door behind them, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through me. Then, slowly, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to them. I had fought back, and it felt good. Days passed, and I decided that I wasn't done. Not yet. My parents had tried to take away everything I had worked for, everything I had built, and they had done it without a second thought. I wasn't going to let that slide. I knew my parents well enough to know their weaknesses. Gerald and Ruth were obsessed with appearances, with keeping up the facade of the perfect family, the perfect life. They loved to gossip, to show off, to make others believe that they were better than everyone else. I decided it was time to tear down that illusion. I started by contacting Richard. It wasn't hard. My brother had never been particularly smart about covering his tracks. A quick search online showed that Richard had been evicted from his last apartment due to unpaid rent. And that wasn't the only thing he was behind on. Debts, shady dealings, it was all there, hiding just beneath the surface. I collected the information, compiling it neatly into a series of documents, and then I made my move. One Sunday afternoon, at a local park where my parents liked to spend their weekends, I arrived, a folder in hand. I found them sitting at a bench, Ruth talking animatedly to one of their neighbors, a plastic smile on her face, Gerald nodding along. I walked up to them, my presence causing the neighbor to glance up in surprise. Adam? Ruth said, her eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? I smiled, a calm, easy smile that held no warmth. I thought we should talk, Mom. Dad. Ruth's eyes darted to the neighbor, her smile becoming strained. We're in the middle of something, Adam. Perhaps you should… Actually, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, I said, raising my voice just enough for the other people in the park to hear. I held up the folder, waving it slightly. It's about Richard. Ruth's face went pale, her eyes widening. Gerald's jaw clenched, and he stood up, grabbing my arm. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. I pulled my arm free, my smile never faltering. Just telling the truth, Dad, about your golden boy, about how he's been evicted, how he's in debt to some very dangerous people, how he's been gambling away every cent he can get his hands on. Ruth's mouth opened and closed, her face a mask of horror. The neighbor was staring at them, eyes wide, and I could see others in the park glancing over, listening. Over. Stop it, Ruth said, her voice trembling. You don't know what you're talking about. I opened the folder, pulling out a document and holding it up. Oh, but I do. I've got all the proof right here. I thought you might like to see it, since you were so eager to make me give up my apartment for him. Gerald lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I stepped back, my smile widening. Not so fast, Dad. I think everyone here deserves to know just what kind of people you are. The kind of parents who would throw one son under the bus to save the other. The kind who would try to take away everything I've worked for just because you think Richard deserves it more. Ruth's face crumpled, her eyes glistening with tears. Adam, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. But I just shook my head. You did this to yourselves. I'm just making sure everyone sees you for who you really are. I turned, walking away, leaving my parents standing there, their perfect image shattered, their lies exposed. As I left the park, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a sense of justice, of closure. They had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, it was their own reputations that lay in ruins. And me, I was free. Free from their control, their manipulation, their cruelty. I had my own life now, a life they could never touch. And for the first time, I felt truly happy. Hi, I don't know if you'll believe this story, but it's one I need to tell. A year ago, my life took a turn that no one could have seen coming. It started when my father got sick, and it ended with me becoming a millionaire. And somewhere in between, the woman I thought I would spend my life with showed her true colors. My father was my hero. He was the kind of man who always had a smile on his face and time for anyone who needed help. He raised me on his own after my mom passed away when I was a kid, and we were always close. So when I got the news that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, there was no question that I would take care of him. It wasn't easy. Watching someone you love fade away is one of the hardest things a person can go through. I moved into my father's house to be with him, taking a leave of absence from work and putting everything else in my life on hold, including my marriage. My wife, Jessica, wasn't exactly thrilled with my decision. We'd been married for 3 years at that point, and things had already been strained between us for a while. Jessica was ambitious, always looking for the next promotion, the next big opportunity. I loved that about her once, but when my father got sick, she saw it as an inconvenience. "Can't you just hire a nurse?" she asked me, her voice tinged with frustration. We were sitting in our living room, the news still fresh. I had hoped she would understand, maybe even support me, but the look on her face said otherwise. "He's my dad, Jess," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want to be there for him. He needs me." She rolled her eyes. "And what about me? What about our life? You're just going to leave me here?" I tried to explain, to make her see that this wasn't a choice for me. But she didn't get it. Or maybe she just didn't care. The weeks turned into months, and my father grew weaker. I spent my days at his side, holding his hand, talking to him, making sure he was comfortable. And every day, Jessica grew more distant. She stopped visiting, stopped calling. Eventually, she stopped coming home altogether. I knew things were bad between us, but I was too wrapped up in my father's care to do anything about it. One day, I got a call from a friend. "I'm sorry, man," he said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "I thought you should know. I saw Jessica with some guy downtown. They looked close." I felt a pang in my chest, but I couldn't say I was surprised. I knew Jessica wasn't happy, but hearing it out loud made it real. Still, I had more important things to focus on. My father needed me, and that was all that mattered. He passed away a few weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. It was the hardest moment of my life, but I was grateful that I could be there with him until the end. After the funeral, I felt like I was drifting. I had spent so much time caring for him that I didn't know what to do with myself now that he was gone. And that's when the lawyer called. My father had left a will, and I was his sole beneficiary. I knew he had some savings, but I never imagined just how much. He had invested wisely over the years, and the inheritance he left me made me a millionaire overnight. It was surreal. One moment, I was lost, and the next, I had the means to do anything I wanted. It didn't take long for Jessica to come back. She showed up at my door one evening, her eyes wide with fake tears, her voice trembling as she told me how sorry she was, how she had made a mistake. She said she missed me, that she wanted to work things out. I could see right through her, but I let her talk, let her spin her web of lies. I wanted to hear just how far she would go. "I've been so lost without you," she said, her eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. "I know I messed up, but I love you, Adam. Please, give me another chance." I almost laughed. The same woman who had abandoned me when I needed her most, who had been seen with another man while I was taking care of my dying father, was now standing in front of me, begging to come back because I was rich. It was almost too pathetic to believe. "You love me?" I asked, my voice calm. "Or do you love the money?" Jessica's face flushed, and she looked away, her mask slipping for just a moment. "That's not fair," she said, her voice shaky. "I made a mistake, but I want to fix it. I want us to be a family again." "A family?" I shook my head, feeling the anger I had kept buried for so long rising to the surface. "You weren't there when I needed you, Jess. You left me when things got hard, and now you want to come back because I have money? You're not here for me. You're here for yourself." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice steady. "We're done. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the anger behind them. She wasn't used to being told no, and she didn't like it. "You're going to regret this, Adam," she said, her voice low and venomous. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "No, Jess," I said. "I think the only thing I regret is not seeing you for who you really are sooner." She left, slamming the door behind her, and I knew it was over, really over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I had meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, people who wanted to help me manage my newfound wealth. It was overwhelming at times, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I decided to invest in things that mattered to me: charities, small businesses, people who needed a break. I wanted to use the money to do some good, to honor my father's memory. But Jessica wasn't done. I started getting calls from mutual friends, people who had heard things, rumors. Jessica was telling anyone who would listen that I had cheated on her, that I had abandoned her, that I was refusing to support her. She painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. It was infuriating, but I tried to rise above it. I knew the truth, and I didn't need to justify myself to anyone. Then the lawsuit came. Jessica filed for spousal support, claiming that I had left her destitute. She said that she had given up her career to support me, that she deserved a share of my inheritance. It was all lies, of course. She had never given up anything for me. But the legal system doesn't care about the truth, only about what can be proven. I hired the best lawyer I could find. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Linda, and she didn't take any nonsense from anyone. From the moment I met her, I knew I was in good hands. "Don't worry," Linda said, her eyes glinting with determination. "We're going to make sure she gets exactly what she deserves." The court proceedings were brutal. Jessica put on quite a show, crying on the stand, talking about how much she had sacrificed for me. She even brought her parents in, who testified about what a wonderful wife she had been, how devastated she was when I abandoned her. It was all a performance, and I had to sit there and watch as she tried to tear my life apart. But Linda was ready. She had evidence, photos of Jessica with the other man, text messages she had sent to friends about how she was done with me, even financial records that showed she had been secretly siphoning money from our joint account for months before she left. Piece by piece, Linda dismantled Jessica's lies until there was nothing left but the truth. By the time it was over, Jessica was a wreck. The judge saw right through her, and her claim for spousal support was denied. She left the courtroom in tears, her face pale and drawn, and I felt nothing but relief. It was finally over. It was. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a new place, one that was truly mine, and started fresh. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and slowly began to find joy in the little things again. I even started dating, though I took things slow. I wasn't ready to open my heart fully just yet, but I knew I would be eventually. As for Jessica, I heard through the grapevine that things weren't going well for her. The guy she had been seeing left her when the money dried up, and she ended up moving back in with her parents. Part of me felt sorry for her. She had always been so focused on what she could get, never on what she could give. But I knew it wasn't my job to save her. She had made her choices, just like I had made mine. One day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Jessica. I hesitated before opening it, not sure I wanted to read whatever she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the paper. It was short, just a few lines. She said she was sorry, that she realized now what she had lost, that she hoped I could forgive her someday. I read the words, and for a moment, I felt a pang of the old hurt, the old anger. But then I let it go. I folded the letter and put it away, not because I wanted to keep it, but because it was a reminder that I had survived, that I had come out the other side stronger. Life has a funny way of testing you, and if there was one thing I learned through all of this, it was that people reveal themselves in times of crisis. My father's illness brought out the best in me. It made me more patient, more empathetic, more willing to fight for the people I loved. But for Jessica, it brought out the worst. She showed me that she was willing to abandon the person she had promised to stand by, all because it was inconvenient for her. And that's the thing about love, isn't it? It's easy when everything is going well. It's easy to love someone when you're both happy and healthy, when there are no obstacles in your way. But real love, the kind that lasts, it's forged in the tough times. It's built on a foundation of trust and sacrifice, of being there when things aren't perfect. When I think back to those months I spent with my father, I don't regret a single moment. They were some of the hardest days of my life, but they were also some of the most meaningful. I got to be there for him, just like he had always been there for me. I held his hand as he took his last breath, and I knew, even in my grief, that I had done the right thing. As for Jessica, I realized that she had never really understood what it meant to love someone. She loved the idea of being with me, of having a partner, of the stability that came with marriage. But when it came to actually being there, to sacrificing her own comfort for the sake of someone else, she just couldn't do it. And maybe, in the end, that was a blessing. It hurt to lose her, to realize that the person I had loved wasn't who I thought she was. But it also freed me. It gave me the chance to start over, to build a life that was truly my own without the weight of her selfishness holding me down. A year after my father passed, I found myself standing in front of his grave, a small bouquet of flowers in my hand. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. I knelt down, placing the flowers at the base of his headstone, and for a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence wash over me. "Hey, Dad," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "It's been a while, huh?" I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. "I wanted to say thank you," I continued, "for everything, for always believing in me, for teaching me what it means to be strong. I hope I'm making you proud." I closed my eyes, letting the memories of him fill my mind, his laughter, his kindness, the way he always seemed to know the right thing to say. I missed him every day, but I knew that he was still with me in everything I did. "I think I'm going to be okay," I said finally, my voice steady. "I've got a good life now. I'm doing my best, just like you always taught me." I stood up, wiping away the tears that had gathered in my eyes. I looked down at the headstone, the words carved into the granite. "Beloved Father, always in our hearts." "I love you, Dad," I whispered, and then I turned and walked away, the weight on my shoulders feeling just a little bit lighter. The thing about life is that it keeps moving, whether you're ready for it or not. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to let go of the past, to embrace whatever the future had in store for me. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more heartbreak, more moments of doubt. But I also knew that I was stronger now, that I had faced the worst and come out the other side. And no matter what happened, I knew I had the strength to keep going. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had loved, I had lost, and I had learned. And maybe, in the end, that was all any of us could hope for. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see Jessica suffer. The best revenge, I realized, was living well. And that's exactly what I intended to do. Hi, I don't know if you'll believe this story, but it's one I've carried with me for years. It's about family, betrayal, and revenge. The kind of revenge that's sweet because it's deserved. It's about my older sister Rebecca and the wedding she tried to ruin, and how in the end, my husband and I gave her exactly what she had coming. Rebecca has always been the favorite. Growing up, she was the golden child. Beautiful, talented, the one everyone adored. Our parents doted on her, showering her with love and praise while I stood in the background unnoticed. She could do no wrong in their eyes, and anything I achieved was always compared to her. If I got an A, Rebecca would have gotten an A+. If I made the school soccer team, Rebecca would have been the captain. I learned early on that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be second best. It was easier just to stay quiet, to let her have the spotlight. I tried to carve out a life for myself outside of her shadow, friends, hobbies, dreams that were my own, and for a while, it worked. I met Daniel when I was 25, and he was the best thing that ever happened to me. He was kind, funny, and he loved me in a way that made me feel seen for the first time in my life. We got engaged after 2 years of dating, and I was happier than I had ever been. But Rebecca couldn't stand it. I think it drove her crazy to see me happy, to see me have something she didn't. She had always been the one to get everything first. The attention, the accolades, the boyfriends. And now, here I was, planning a wedding, and she couldn't handle it. The first sign that something was wrong came at our engagement party. My parents had insisted on hosting it at their house, and I agreed, hoping maybe this would be a chance for us all to come together to celebrate something good. Rebecca showed up late, her entrance grand and attention-grabbing as always. She was dressed in a tight red dress that left little to the imagination, her makeup immaculate. She made a beeline for Daniel, ignoring me completely, her laughter loud as she touched his arm, leaned in close. "You sure you want to marry my sister?" she asked him, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You know she's always been a bit of a mess, right?" Daniel just smiled politely, gently stepping away from her. "I think she's perfect," he said, his eyes meeting mine across the room, giving me a wink. Rebecca's smile faltered, and for a moment, I saw the hatred in her eyes. She quickly masked it, turning away with a laugh, but I knew that she couldn't stand seeing me happy. The next few months were a nightmare. Rebecca was everywhere, always inserting herself into the wedding planning, offering her advice that was really just thinly veiled criticism. "You're wearing that dress?" she'd say, her nose wrinkling. "I guess it's fine, if that's what you want." She convinced our parents to side with her on every decision, making me feel like a guest at my own wedding. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. I remember the way she announced it, her voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. We were at my parents' house, going over the guest list, when she stood up, a hand on her stomach, her eyes glistening with fake tears. "I just have some wonderful news," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant! Isn't it amazing?" My mother gasped, rushing over to hug her, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Rebecca, that's wonderful! We're going to be grandparents!" My father beamed, pulling her into a hug. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." And just like that, the attention shifted. My wedding was forgotten, overshadowed by Rebecca's news. She smiled at me over my mother's shoulder, her eyes cold and triumphant, and I knew she had planned this. She had timed it perfectly, making sure that my day would be all about her. I tried to stay calm, tried to focus on what mattered: Daniel, our love, the life we were building together. But Rebecca wasn't done. She started dropping hints, little comments that were meant to undermine me. "You know," she said one day, her voice casual, "a lot of marriages end in divorce, especially when one partner isn't really ready for the commitment." She looked at me, her smile sweet. "I just hope you know what you're doing." My parents, of course, took her side. They were thrilled about the baby, and every conversation seemed to revolve around Rebecca and her pregnancy. "Are you sure you want to go through with the wedding?" my mother asked me one evening, her voice gentle. "I mean, with everything going on with Rebecca, maybe it would be better to postpone?" I was furious. This was my wedding, my day, and once again, Rebecca was trying to take it away from me, but I refused to let her win. I smiled, nodding politely, and told my mother that the wedding was going ahead as planned. I wasn't going to let Rebecca ruin this for me. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was determined to make it perfect. I had spent months planning every detail, making sure that everything was just right. But of course, Rebecca had one last trick up her sleeve. She showed up at the church in a white dress. I couldn't believe it. She walked in, her stomach barely showing, but her dress was tight, clinging to her curves. She smiled at the guests, waving as she made her way to the front row, where my parents were sitting. My mother beamed at her, pulling her into a hug, while my father patted her on the back, congratulating her once again on the baby. I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling as I stood at the back of the church, waiting to walk down the aisle. Daniel was by my side, his hand on my arm, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice soft. I took a deep breath, nodding. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do this." The ceremony went off without a hitch, despite Rebecca's best efforts. I kept my focus on Daniel, on the love we shared, and for a moment, I forgot about her. I forgot about the dress, the pregnancy, the way she had tried to take everything from me. In that moment, it was just me and him, and nothing else mattered. But as soon as the ceremony was over, Rebecca was back at it. She made a toast at the reception, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she talked about how proud she was of me, how she hoped I was ready for the challenges of marriage. She winked at Daniel, her smile sly, and I could see the way my parents hung on her every word, nodding along as if she were some kind of oracle. I had had enough. That night, after the reception was over and the guests had gone home, Daniel and I sat in our hotel room, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I shook my head, the tears finally spilling over. "No," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm not okay. She's been trying to ruin this for me from the start, and I'm so tired of it. I'm tired of her, of my parents, of all of it." Daniel took my hand, his grip gentle. "Then let's do something about it," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make sure she never does this to you again." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a cold, determined smile. "I think it's time we showed Rebecca that actions have consequences, that she can't keep treating you like this and expect to get away with it." And that's when we started planning our revenge. The first step was gathering information. Rebecca had always been careful, always making sure to keep her reputation spotless. But everyone has secrets, and Daniel was determined to find hers. He spent weeks digging, using every contact he had, every resource at his disposal, and eventually, he found it. It turned out that Rebecca's perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. The father of her baby wasn't her boyfriend. In fact, she didn't even have a boyfriend. The father was a married man, someone she had been seeing on the side, someone who had no intention of leaving his wife for her. It was the kind of scandal that would ruin her, that would turn our parents against her, that would make everyone see her for who she really was. We waited until the right moment. It was a family dinner a few weeks after the wedding. My parents had invited us over, and of course, Rebecca was there, basking in the attention as she talked about her pregnancy, about how excited she was to be a mother. Daniel and I exchanged a look, and I nodded, my heart pounding as I stood up, clearing my throat. "Actually, I have something I'd like to say," I said, my voice steady. Everyone turned to look at me, my parents smiling, Rebecca's eyes narrowing slightly. "What is it, dear?" my mother asked, her voice sweet. I took a deep breath, my eyes locked on Rebecca. "I think it's time we all knew the truth," I said. "The truth about Rebecca's pregnancy." Rebecca's face went pale, her eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice shaky. Daniel stood up beside me, a stack of papers in his hand. "We know who the father is, Rebecca," he said, his voice calm, "and it's not who you've been telling everyone it is." My mother gasped, her eyes darting between us and Rebecca. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel handed her the papers, copies of text messages, photos, everything we had found. "The father is a married man," he said, his voice cold. "Someone who has no intention of being a part of Rebecca's life or the baby's. She's been lying to all of you." Rebecca stood up, her face flushed, her hands trembling. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice rising. "This is none of your business." I shook my head, my eyes locked on hers. "You made it our business when you tried to ruin my wedding," I said, my voice steady. "You've spent your whole life trying to take everything from me, and I'm done letting you get away with it." My father looked at Rebecca, his face pale, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rebecca opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around the room, her eyes wild, and for the first time in my life, I saw her for what she really was: weak, desperate, a liar, who had built her life on the backs of others. "Get out," my mother said, her voice shaking. "I can't even look at you right now." Rebecca looked at me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You'll pay for this," she hissed, her voice low. I smiled, a sense of calm washing over me. "No, Rebecca," I said. "I think it's finally time you paid for everything you've done." She left, slamming the door behind her, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from her shadow, from her cruelty, from the weight of always being second best. In the weeks that followed, the truth about Rebecca spread. The man she had been seeing wanted nothing to do with her, and without the support of our parents, she was left on her own. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a small apartment across town, that she was struggling to make ends meet. Part of me felt sorry for her, but I knew she had brought this on herself. Daniel and I focused on building our life together, but we knew that Rebecca was not the type to back down easily. She was wounded, and a wounded animal is often the most dangerous. We needed to be prepared. One day, we got a call from a friend of Daniel's, someone who worked in finance and had been keeping an eye on Rebecca's situation. "You might want to take a look at this," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Rebecca's in trouble. She's racked up a ton of debt, and it looks like she's been using some shady loans to try and get by." Daniel and I exchanged a look. It wasn't enough for Rebecca to be humiliated. She needed to understand the real consequences of her actions, and it seemed like she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. We decided to pay her a visit. We drove to her apartment, a rundown building in a less than ideal part of town. It was a stark contrast to the life she had once lived, the beautiful house she had shared with our parents, the luxurious clothes and vacations she had always flaunted. Now she was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, her dreams of grandeur reduced to nothing. When she opened the door, she looked like a shadow of her former self. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, and the fire that had always burned in her eyes was gone. She looked at us with a mix of surprise and suspicion, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We want to talk, Rebecca," he said. "We want to help you, but you need to understand that this is the end of the line. No more games, no more lies." Rebecca scoffed, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "Help me? After everything you did to me? You ruined my life!" I shook my head, stepping closer. "No, Rebecca," I said softly. "You ruined your own life. We just exposed the truth. You spent years trying to tear me down, trying to take everything I had. And now, look where it's gotten you." For a moment, Rebecca was silent, her eyes glistening with tears. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be loved." I felt a pang of sympathy, but I pushed it aside. "You could have been," I said, "but instead of being happy for me, instead of letting me have my moment, you tried to destroy it. You made your choices, Rebecca, and now you have to live with them." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. "We're willing to help you get back on your feet," he said, handing it to her. "This is enough to cover your debts, to give you a fresh start. But this is it. There are no more chances after this." Rebecca took the envelope, her hands trembling. She looked up at us, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and resentment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel looked at me, then back at her. "Because we're not like you, Rebecca," he said. "We don't want to see you suffer. We want you to learn, to grow, to be better. But you have to want that too." For a long moment, Rebecca didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at the envelope in her hands. Finally, she nodded, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I'll try," she said. "I'll try to be better." We left her then, the door closing behind us with a soft click. As we walked away, I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifting off my shoulders. For years, I had carried the burden of Rebecca's cruelty, the constant comparison, the feeling of never being enough. But now, I was free to live my life, to love Daniel, to build a future without the shadow of my sister looming over me. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Daniel and I focused on building our future, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly living for myself. We bought a house, a cozy little place on the outskirts of town, and filled it with love and laughter. We made new memories, ones that weren't tainted by the past, and I finally felt at peace. Rebecca kept her distance. I heard from our parents that she had moved to a new city, that she was trying to start over. I hoped she would find what she was looking for, that she would learn from her mistakes and become the person I always wished she could be. But I knew that her journey was her own, and it wasn't my responsibility to save her. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Rebecca. I hesitated before opening it, not sure if I wanted to read whatever she had to say, but curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the paper. "Dear Emily, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect you to ever truly forgive me for everything I've done. But I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for the pain I caused. I realize now that I was wrong, that I let my jealousy and my own insecurities destroy the one relationship that should have mattered most, my relationship with you. I'm trying to be better. I've started therapy and I'm working on myself. It's not easy, and there are days when I feel like giving up, but I want you to know that I'm trying, and that's because of you. You showed me that I can't keep running from my mistakes, that I have to face them if I ever want to move forward. I don't expect us to ever be close again, but I hope that someday we can be in the same room without all the anger and resentment. I hope that someday you can see that I'm trying to change. Thank you for giving me the chance to start over. Love, Rebecca. I read the letter twice, the words sinking in. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment, of Rebecca finally realizing the pain she had caused, finally apologizing. And now that it was here, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to find some kind of peace. I folded the letter and put it away, not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because it was a